everyone. Welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, The Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops, a former D1 hooper and current teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids.
And I'm Omari for the second Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
And of course, we're always blessed to be joined by our producer, Wes Davenport. If you are not listening to Wes and Blake Silverman over on the Pin Down on the Detroit Bad Boys YouTube channel, you absolutely should be. Make sure you're subscribed over there. Make sure you're subscribed here. Ratings, reviews, all of that. Also, make sure you are reading Omari Sankofa II on the Detroit Free Press. And if you have it in you, the Motor City Hoops Substack, where our free subscriptions for game notes analysis dropped a video breakdown of Cade Cunningham's offensive game against the Wizards on Tuesday night. 0-2, couple losses for the Pistons. They come back, they beat the Blazers, take care of business against the Wizards on Tuesday, have them again on Thursday. They're top 4, tied for top 4 in the East. The vibes, I always like to do the vibe check. Where's things at right now?
Yeah, I mean, the vibes are still good. They're still confident. I think it's tough to kind of lose those 2 in the middle against teams that are beatable, but James Harden puts up 50. Like when James Harden puts up 50 and they're already a good team, like that's going to be tough to beat, obviously, even though they didn't have Norman Powell. And, and they just dropped games against good teams. They were competitive, but they got the games they were supposed to get as well, obviously, against Utah. That was a blowout. And then taking care of business in Portland, too. So they're like exactly where, they're not exactly where they should be. They're way ahead of where they should be. They're competing for the 4th seed. But they've sustained this for a certain period of time. And now you have 16 games left. And, I think this trip was just more evidence that like they are a genuine 4 through 6 seed. Like they're right there with Indiana and Milwaukee. This isn't a fluke. Like this isn't fate. They're really that good. They've done it for 3 months now, almost. We're like 9 days short of the 3-month mark where they kind of took off December 21st. I don't even know what their record is since then now. They're like 15. I don't know. It's something crazy. Long story short, they've been good. They've been maintaining it. And now you've got 16 games left. And, if you get 10 of those, you're 47 and 35 or whatever that adds up to, like still playing with house money.
Yeah, it's crazy. I think what always stands out to me, just as you look at standings, they're 18 and 14 at home. They're 19 and 15 on the road. Just a ridiculous.
Only 4 teams in the East have winning records on the road. I tweeted it earlier. And yeah. And it's just the top 3 teams in the East and then the Pistons. The Pacers and Bucks both have losing records on the road. So
it's crazy. They're 7-3 in their last 10. Like it just, like you said, they look like they belong right in this realm they're in. They're 5 games back of the 3-seeded Knicks while being 5.5 up on the 7-seeded Hawks. And so it's just crazy stuff. What's funny is I never look at the divisions. I never pay attention. Do you know
they don't matter?
They don't matter at all. It's not like the NFL where it does. It's just funny because the Southeast division is essentially the play-in division with the Hawks, Magic, and Heat. The Hawks are winning the Southeast division at 31 and 34. The Pistons at 37 and 25, 0-2. Are 4th in the Central because it's the Cavs, the Bucks, the Pacers, and then Detroit. So again, it does not matter. It was just kind of a funny thing when I actually looked at the divisions one day.
The Bulls are still like in the top seed.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
that's like a full playoff.
Yeah, the entire division is. The entire division could land in the playoffs, right? Yeah. If the way things are today, 4 teams would be in. Chicago would have to win 2 play-in games, but it just is kind of funny. You're right. Divisions don't matter. Other than, scheduling type stuff. I assume you play your division. Like, this is how little I pay attention to divisions. I assume
you play everybody in your division, like it's 4 total games. And then everybody else in your conference is 4 or 3. And then obviously 2 in the West. So
2 in the West. So, but yeah, vibes are good. The team's in a good spot. We don't need to go through the whole schedule, but it will be interesting. They got to get the Wizards one. And then, it just depends on the night. Like, yes, you get OKC, but who plays for Miami that night? And who plays for the Pelicans the night they get them? The Spurs, same thing. What's awesome, you could get a really fun stretch down the stretch of a back-to-back of Knicks, Bucks, day off, and then another one against the Bucks. So could be really, really cool. Real quick before we get into this, your dad, Omari Sankofa, Little Caesars looked like it was rocking. Are they selling out? Vibes are high. What is it like at Little Caesars?
Yeah, the crowds have definitely been like extremely festive with how they've played, obviously. But they were like festive last year, just in a different way. The crowds never went away. Like they were showing up to boo last year. Now they're showing up to cheer. It wasn't like the best crowd this season last night just because it's the Wizards, but like pretty consistently, like they've been like pretty close to a sellout or at a sellout like every night. Like I know that game against the Celtics, I think on February 28th, like that was for sure a sellout. And had a couple other games that week that were pretty filled. So crowds have been great. Like just going around the league, seeing how empty some of the other arenas are. Like the Pistons are pretty solidly, like even when they were bad, they were pretty solidly in the middle last season. So now I just say they've probably been top 10.
All right. So today's episode is all about exceeding expectations. Well, I shouldn't say all about. It's about expectations. A lot of players exceeding those, some of them meeting those expectations, and maybe a player being below expectations. So the idea was here, as we just have, 16 games left in the season, let's see where we're at with different players. Because the nice thing about this season is when we get to the stretch run and into the playoffs, we're talking the games, right? Like we don't have time to do this stuff. The offseason is going to be a little bit shorter because they're going to play into the playoffs. So we thought it'd be a good time to do it now. And then we'll get into the stretch run after that. So I polled, including us three, we looked at some other content creators, some fans, stuff like that. We ended up being 20 people. We're not going to give anybody's individual rankings of this. It's just on a Google sheet, put it in there. I have the total ranking. I have the mean, so the average. I have the mode, the one that shows up the most, and the range. So we'll discuss all of that. But this was 20 different people's view. Now, the thing with expectations, Omari, everybody came into the season with different expectations for each of these players. So the ranges will be wide, and we'll discuss that as we go throughout it. And you need to take that into account as a listener. But I will say, polling 20 people, I think it gives you a decent average of all of those things. So that is what we're doing. We're going to go 9-1. Because we want you guys to stick around to the very end. And
suspense is good.
Suspense is good. There will not be a lot of suspense here at the top because I assume the player we will talk about first would be most of your guys' ninth. We did 9 people, so we didn't include Marcus Sasser, Jaden Ivey, Dennis Schroeder, anybody like that. So it's kind of the 9 guys in the rotation on a nightly basis right now, minus Dennis Schroeder, no JB Bickerstaff, front office, nothing like that. So we will start at number 9. I will give the information and then we will talk about it. So at number 9, with an average of 9th place, with a mode of 9th place, with a range of 9th place, which means on all 20 ballots, this player came in 9th. And some people did give us a little bit of like, hey, this is why. I would say this is probably the one player that was consistently with the below expectations label is unfortunately Omari Simone Fontecchio.
Yeah, he just hasn't shot the ball that well, especially relative to last season. And I think some of that is that last season was obviously a disaster, but he was probably one of the few bright spots where he comes in at the trade deadline and was just a 3-and-D wing, which they just didn't really have all season. And he kind of filled that gap. And he best filled with Cade. And he was probably one of the guys that came into the offseason. Like, we have to re-sign him. We have to, he's a guy that fits here. And he's probably the one guy on the roster who's had a consistent role, but just hasn't really gotten comfortable within that role. And we've seen flashes of it. Like, I thought the first half last night, he was really good against the Wizards. Like, a couple good rotations at the end of quarters to just deny opportunities, knock down a couple threes. But, it seems like he's just had a tendency to do a little bit too much. And when he stays within his role, it's been fine. I think it's just once you get to the shot creation aspect of it, that's when it begins to fall apart a bit. So again, I do think Tech to an extent is just a victim of how good he was on a bleak season last year, but he also just hasn't shot the ball as well. And that's something you expected him to do, if nothing else, shoot the ball well.
Yeah, I know for me, I had high expectations. I mean, if you go listen to episodes before the season, I thought Fontecchio was going to be a starter. I thought he would slot in nicely in the starting lineup with what they would need. So if you look at what he did just in Detroit last season compared to what he's doing right now, last season he was 48% from the field, 43% from 3. This season, 39% from the field, 32% from 3. His minutes are down. His attempts are down. I don't know if not getting those consistent larger minutes was, an issue here, but he shot the ball well from 3 on 5. I mean, it is the lowest 3-point attempts of his career, so maybe that is bothering Fontecchio. He was 9 on my list. I don't mind giving my list out there. Again, the other people we asked to participate, we told them we wouldn't do their individual, call them out. But again, this one was literally unanimous at number 9. And if you're watching live, I'd love to get your comments in the chat as well. So where would you you have, these specific players as we go through it? Where would you have Simone Fontecchio? What have you thought about his season? I will say this, Omari. Offensively, obviously hasn't made shots, tried to do too much with the ball in his hands. I do think one thing he's done well that's maybe gone under the radar is I think he's been solid defensively. He had 2 big plays against, it was Washington, right? Last night, where he had rim protections that led directly to offense in transition for the Pistons. And I think he's been a quality offensive rebounder as well. So when he gets in the game, I feel like you're going to get some solid defense and he might get an offensive rebound or 2. I just don't trust him to make shots right now. And I really don't trust him when the ball's in his hands. He's trying to do something off the bounce.
Yeah, and I asked JB about Tex Rowe last night. Just got to get in at that, right? Like, a shot hasn't fallen, but what else has he done that, has allowed him to stick? And that's what JB talked about. Like, he crashes the boards, he defends. And for 15 minutes a night, the Pistons have 37 wins, so, it's not like this has hurt the team in any substantial way, right? Like, if Tech I think if he gets one game where he can just go like 7 of 10 from 3, like, he will be fine the rest of the season. Like, he just needs that one game where he just catches fire, and that might be it. But he's probably, he's just the one guy that's sort of been in a slump this season, and, the defensive rebounding has been there, and if he starts hitting shots, then, I think he can turn things around pretty quickly and certainly give him a lift in the playoffs if nothing else.
Yeah. Okay. So speaking of the playoffs, that's interesting as well. I'm really fascinated to see what JB does with his rotation, if he keeps it at 10, and if it doesn't keep it at 10, is Fontecchio a guy that could potentially fall out? I thought Fontecchio was going to be a double-digit guy scoring coming into the season. Obviously has not been that. So next on our list, and there's a big gap, like if you want to look at tiers. So Fontecchio, if you just go 1 as being the person that exceeded expectations the most, 9 being the least, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you just add those up. So Fontecchio was obviously at 180, right? 9 times 20. The next person was at 139 total points for an average of 7. Their mode, so the most they got was 8th. So in general, they got quite a few 8th votes. I would say for a lot of people, this is where it would be like met expectations, not necessarily below expectations. And the range of this player, you'll get this a lot moving forward, was anywhere from 2nd to 8th on people's ballots. Tim Hardaway Jr., who has started 62 games for this team this season, played in 62 games this season, so been very available. 36% from 3 on almost 6 attempts, taking a lot of charges on the defensive end. But as YouTube user says, I thought there was a 50% chance that THJ was washed, and a player that you traded away Quentin Grimes to acquire, even though there was some draft picks exchanged in that as well. So thoughts on Tim Hardaway Jr. in terms of what you expected from him this season, Omari?
Yeah, I think this is where you sort of get into the differing definitions of expectations.
Absolutely.
And, before you hopped on, me and Wes got to have this debate before the pod where, I think I had THJ 8th on my list and Wes had him a little bit higher. And, the argument for him exceeding expectations essentially is that, like, he started every game and he's been part of a really productive starting lineup. And, people probably thought he'd come in and not have that big of a role. His last season in Dallas wasn't his best season. And, he's getting older. So naturally people kind of wonder how much you have left in the tank. And, I think I put him 8th because even though he's played more than I expected, he's been Tim Hardaway Jr. He's been who he's been. And that's been good for the starting unit. I think to have that anchor and to have that experience and presence. I didn't know if he was going to start, but he's shooting 36% from 3. His numbers are pretty much in line with what he's done throughout his career. So for me, it was just more so, well, he's starting, but, he's been Tim Hardaway Jr. He's, it's not like he came out and he's scoring 20 points on 48% from 3 or anything, but he's played a lot more. And if you ask him for the season, if, THJ starts every single game and, they win like this. So I see both sides. He's 8th on my list, but I think depending on how you take the argument, then you could argue he's a lot higher for that reason.
He was 5th on my list, and that was only because I didn't know what to expect. I didn't expect him to start, that was for sure. And while I still think in general he's probably a slightly below negative neutral defender, I think it trends slightly that way because he just really struggles to stay in front of people. I do think he gives effort on that end. You've seen him make rotations. Again, I mentioned the charges drawn. Wes, if you could drop, I didn't label in the sheet whose was what, so if you could drop in the chat where you had guys ranked as well, if you don't mind, I guess. If you don't want to, you don't have to, obviously. But I mean, yeah, this this is where, to me, this is where the met expectations at very least for a lot of people was. Like, this was already the line where Simone was essentially the only guy that was below. And then you started getting into, hey, these guys are at least kind of what I thought. I do think for him, a lot of people thought maybe he was completely washed and wasn't going to give anything. And I think that's where I have him at 5 was like, okay, you see what Quentin Grimes is doing for the Mavericks and now for the Sixers. And it's like, okay, you needed something to come out of what you traded for that guy. And he is definitely giving floor spacing, helped them win a game in Miami or against Miami, at least that overtime game. He takes a shot or two every once in a while. I'm like, man, that's a little bit too much. Yeah, so Wes had Tim Hardaway Jr. That would be 7th on his list in terms of expectations. So yeah, Tim Hardaway Jr. comes in 8th overall here. Next player, there is another little bit of a jump. The next two players were 1 point different, so very tight between the next two. 24-point difference between Harris and Tim Hardaway Jr. Tobias Harris comes in 7th, Omari, average of 5.8. His mode was 7th. His range was anywhere from 2 to 8th on people's lists. Thoughts on Tobias Harris?
So it's sort of the same with THJ, where it's just what were your expectations relative to them coming in? Tobias, again, like THJ, was coming off a season that wasn't his best. And he's another year older. And then, he signs a $52 million deal for 2 years, which, for some people, like that's a lot of money, in the grand scheme of the way the cap's going up, which granted, I'm still kind of wrapping my mind around like the new numbers too and what's good and what's bad. Like, to be honest, and I don't know if anybody really has the best handle on that. But long story short, is what did you expect from Tobias, right? Is he going to be like how he was early in Philly, or is it going to be last season? And he's been somewhere in the middle. Like, he had a slow start, but since January 1st, he's like been exactly what you wanted from him. But beyond that, it's just the locker room impact, right? And I kind of wrote about him and THJ being the Uncle T's in the locker room the other week. But everybody just loves what he's brought to this team just from a veteran presence standpoint, and him coming in here intentionally to do that. I forget where I had him on my list. I think I had him a little bit lower. Yeah, he was 7th on my list as well. But again, if you thought he was going to come in and not live up to the deal and whatnot, then I can see the argument for 2 or 3 as well, because he's been a key piece for these guys through and through.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot with the veterans, especially the two we've just talked about, was, did you think that they were completely washed, right? And so if you thought
people might have been scarred by like Joe Harris last year too.
Yes,
right? So.
And rightfully so probably. And the other thing was like $26 million is a lot of money. And so like if we did like, but that's a little bit of a different conversation. We didn't say like, what were your expectations based on the contract value, right? Like if we did expectations based on what guys are making, then the things would change a little bit as well. I had Harris 7th and Wes had him 8th. So we were all kind of in the same range where I think he's probably met, but as Michael says, the production is underwhelming relative to his impact. He's a pro and knows his role. And if you just look at his numbers, he's not playing many less minutes per game than what you've seen over the last 4 or 5 seasons from him. Over the last 5 seasons, he's averaged 17.5 points on 49, 37, 86. This year, he's at 14 points a game on 47, 34, 87. The rebounding is actually a little bit less, even though I feel like most Pistons fans would say he's been a good and impactful defensive rebounder. I think what it comes down to is it seems like for the most part, he gives this team what it needs when they need it. And I think we all know this team is lacking a true number 2 option, right? And Tobias isn't going to be that, but it's almost like he is for like a 2-minute stretch. Like he'll come in a fourth quarter. I think it may have been the Blazers game where he had a huge fourth quarter. In the first 2 or 3 minutes, he got some buckets. He actually hit a big baseline mid-range jumper last night against the Wizards when they were trying to make their fourth quarter push. So it's like he almost becomes that number 2 option for a single possession or a singular, minute or a few minutes or quarter. And that's kind of what they need. It's not ideal. It's not $26 million production, obviously. But based off what I thought he was going to bring this team, he's probably met expectations. Not necessarily the numbers, but just his overall impact, I think. Yeah, Alan says he kept us in the Warriors game too. So there's multiple examples of that. And defensively, another guy not able to move a lot. But man, like his hands are ridiculous, Omari. Like he's so accurate with his hands when he digs at the ball.
Yeah, and that's the thing with Tobias. It's like he is, like YouTube users saying here, like a stabilizing presence. Like if you lost the game, it's not because of Tobias Harris. He's always going to go out there and give you something. Even if he doesn't shoot the ball the best, he's going to have some defensive plays. He's going to have 8 or 9 rebounds. Like he's had some multiple block games. Like he's always producing. He's always keeping the guys organized and settled. And I think just having that baseline, like at the 3 or 4, like wherever you kind of view his position relative to Asar, like he's been consistent like every single night. Like even if the shot's not falling, he's been consistent in other ways. And that's been a huge lift for him. So for us, that's like meeting expectations. But again, if you had Joe Harris fears, then yeah, he's been way better than that by far.
Yeah, and that consistency is important. I mean, I remember, I'm not trying to like have Sadiq Bey catch a stray here, but it was like Sadiq Bey was frustrating because one night he might go get 28 and shoot lights out, and then the next night he didn't. You know, it was like always up and down, where it seems like Tobias is just, you know, pretty consistent across the board. So that gets us our first 3, or I guess bottom 3. Simone Fontecchio came in 9th, Tim Hardaway Jr. 8th, Tobias Harris 7th by 1 point above number 6, which we'll talk about right after this short break.
All right, we are back with segment 2, and we're just going to go ahead and dive right in to who's number 6 on our list. And that player is Mr. Ronald Holland II, the rookie.
So he got 114 points is how I will say it, which Harris got 115. So his average was 5.7. His mode was 6, where he's ranked here. His range was actually a little smaller than a lot of people's, believe it or not. He was anywhere from 3 to 8. So where have you been at with Ron Holland? Number 5 overall pick, but a young player, a lot of rawness to his game. But Omari, there's only 2 guys that have played in every game this season for the Detroit Pistons. We'll talk about the other one later, but Ron Holland, all 66 games, 15 and a half minutes per.
Yeah, I mean, before the season, we were talking about the Pistons are so deep on the wing that Ron might be the first lottery pick for them that like doesn't have a guaranteed spot, right? And like he's made that sound ridiculous because he's like as you said, he's like one of 2 guys who have played in every single game, and like rightfully so, because even if it's just 10, 15 minutes here or there, he finds ways to be productive, whether it's defensively, just creating havoc in transition. Like every now and then he'll have a drive to the rim where, you know, he's just has like some funky footwork and like body maneuvering. And it's like, okay, like he's got some juice there, but he's always doing something. Like I feel like you always notice Ron when he's out there. He's never out there for that long. And that's like the best compliment you can give, you know, to a rookie who was still 18 years old when the season started. So yeah, he certainly exceeded expectations just in the sense that like he was a surprise at the 5th pick, and he has been a quality rotation player for a team that's going to finish somewhere between 4 and 6. So, I mean, absolutely, I think he's exceeded most expectations.
Yeah, so he was 6th on mine, and for Wes, I believe he was actually 3rd. And again, I think this is where you really get into the nuance of the conversation in terms of what did you think this player was going to be? The one of the players we're going to talk about soon, I had really low on my list because I felt like I knew what this player was, and what he's doing this year is exactly what I thought he was. I mean, it's kind of it'll happen with Cade and some other guys as well. And so I think it's like, okay, for Ron, were your expectations based on him being the number 5 pick and what you think you should get from the number 5 pick? Or is it based on like what he actually was in terms of a player coming into the NBA and the Detroit Pistons organization? And for me, just where I am fortunate enough to do as much draft stuff as I do, I knew there was a lot of rawness to his offensive game. To be quite honest, it's been even more raw than I thought, O2. I actually thought he'd shoot the ball a little bit better than what he has. I looked the other day, he hasn't made a 3 in like, I think it's been over 2 months now, but the defense has been better. And one thing that has absolutely translated, and I think this is why he can get consistent minutes, his confidence never wavers, and the way he plays and how hard he plays never wavers either.
And he's also always like whenever guys get chippy, Ron's always right there, and I think that's endearing too.
I want to tell real quick, everybody watched the game, but I put in my notes. So when Cade and Keyshawn George got into it a little bit and Middleton went over to protect his rookie, I actually respected that from Chris Middleton. Like I respected that. Pistons fans may not have. I realize that like sometimes we only look at it from a Pistons perspective because I kind of want to be like, can we really get mad at Tyrese Halliburton for celebrating when Malik Beasley literally shakes his hips in front of the other team's bench after a three? Like, just saying. But what was funny, then later in the game, Marcus Smart is trying to chirp at Isaiah Stewart, and who steps in front? The rookie, Ron Holland. And I was like, okay, this is kind of amazing.
Yeah, like Ron is always ready. Like, I think that's his best quality is like his readiness. Like, he's always going to be ready to hop in and do something. And he's always 100% locked in. And like, even that's enough to make a difference. And it just helps when he also just has a nose for the ball on defense. And he's really light on his feet and doesn't make a lot of mistakes. Like, he's very unselfish and he tries to stay out the way and just help where he can, right? Like, and I think that's been a credit to him. Just like a really solid, just smart all around, like rookie. Like, he's come in and he's chipped in wherever he's been needed and he's played every single game. And again, I don't think anybody necessarily projected that for him coming into this year.
Devon Ambitious says Hallie is just annoying. Like, no, I get it. Like, I'm not trying to take shots. Like, sometimes I watch, I'm like, I love the Pistons vibes. Like, I love how they do their celebrations and all of it. It's just like, okay, if we're going to love this, we got to be okay with some of the other stuff. And Mike, also, Hallie's shot last night was absolutely ridiculous. He may be annoying, but that shot was silly. And then Michael, Bryce, stop bringing rational talk. Let us be fans. You're right, because I understand the irrationalness of being a fan whenever we talk Kansas City Chiefs. I will say, I think the thing I like with Ron right now is there was real questions about his decision-making, his passing, some of that stuff coming in. I think every game he shows real unselfishness, reading the floor decently well, all of that. So I like this spot for Ron Holland. The next one is one where I want to have some conversation because of all of the rankings, this is the one that frustrates me just a little bit, and I'll explain why. But coming in fifth, with 105 votes, so this is 9 ahead. So there's a little pocket here of this player, Ron Holland, Tobias Harris, a 5.3 average, a mode of 6, even though there's a bunch that were right there, and a range of 2 to 8 is Isaiah Stewart. Your thoughts on Isaiah Stewart and how that has met or exceeded your expectations this year?
So I actually had Stu 3 on my list, and I was one of the highest ones. I think 3 people voted him 2. I might have been the only 3, but yeah, like it's like for the most part, people ranked him in the middle, and I guess I was a little bit higher. The thing with Stu is that I think everybody agrees that he's been like the backbone of the defense in a lot of ways, even though he's come off the bench. And him and Malik Beasley, just really what they've brought to that bench unit has really just kind of stabilized, even without having necessarily like a secondary scorer who could be the primary when Cade's out. Like it's given them enough to like not be buried when Cade sits, like what would happen last year. And Beef Stew's been a massive part of that. So I guess the thing for me is that Beef Stew has almost entirely abandoned the 3. He has played very little 4. He's been completely dialed in as a 5. And not only has he been one of the most impactful defenders in the league within his minutes, he's also improved significantly as a finisher at the rim, which previously was a weakness, and that's gotten better for him as well. And it's just interesting, right? Like I'm surprised that he's
No. I get to do this. This is my Stu. I'm literally upset, Omari. I'm mad about this. Because I had sleepless nights debating Pistons fans telling me how much Stewart sucked and how he shouldn't be, like how they didn't want him on this team, how he wasn't impactful, all of this. So I would like an explanation of how he ended up 8th on so many ballots, how he ends up in this spot. Because either people still don't value him, or I think some people have forgotten, maybe I just polled the right people, have forgotten how low they were on Isaiah Stewart for him to end up so low on this. Wes knew this was coming. I texted this in the group today. I said, the Stu ranking actually makes me mad. And Wes is like, yeah, I had a feeling you would feel that way about it. I've defended Stu so much. And so I don't know, Devon, like, do you think it's really that they don't value him? I think people do value him now. I think people aren't carrying their receipts and forget how down they were on Isaiah Stewart.
Yeah, so, like he's averaging like a block and a half in like 20 minutes. Like his block rate, which was already good, has skyrocketed. Like he has genuinely improved this season. Like it's not just him doing what he's always done. Like he's genuinely morphed into one of the best backup bigs in the league. Like he's actually made I think he's made a leap this season, going back to his initial role. Like I never would have predicted that. I think you probably saw him as a hybrid 4-5. Now he's been a pure 5 and playing his best basketball.
So, Chuck, this is definitely part of it. Chuck says because he was not a stretch four, he's back where he belongs in the paint. That is true, but that's what frustrated me about those conversations was people were only evaluating him as like this four-man when the Pistons stunk and were trying to figure some things out in the ceiling of things, and they were blaming Stu for everything and taking this kind of experiment as this guy can't ever be anything when, like, I would give a shout out to James Edwards III. Like, he defended him all the time as well, along with me and you. Like, this is a playoff big. This is a valuable big. You can see that it's there, even if it was disrupting things. I also think it's funny now they have a non-shooting big and wing, and we don't yell about that as much with Asar and Duran. I find it interesting. But yeah, anyway, listen, I try not to do this.
Where was Stu on your list, by the way?
Eighth, because I knew he was this. He was eighth. Like, and it's not a negative. It's just like, eighth. He met my expectations. I just felt like he was going to be higher on other people's lists because of how much negativity I had heard about him for so long. And then it seems like it's finally come around to people valuing him. I was surprised people didn't have them higher in terms of expectation. So I had him H.
Yeah, and I think along with that is that Isaiah Stewart has always sort of been, outside of his rookie season, he's always been asked to do things that he naturally had not done before, right? So you're judging him as a three-point shooter, as a pure wing defender against other fours, and I think some of that, too, is just that he is getting back to the five where he is most comfortable. But now you combine that with 4 years of NBA experience where he's played both sides. So I think all of that, I think everything he's done up to this point has really prepared him for this moment. And again, it comes down to how you view it. But yeah, Stu's third on my list just because, he deserves all defense conversation. And I don't know, just given the way that this roster was structured coming in, I don't know if he would have had that type of talk playing 20 minutes a night, which just shows how impactful he's been.
Listen, I'm just playing it up a little bit here. Like, I'm actually not mad about it. It just was,
It's okay to be a little bit mad about it.
I spent a lot of time debating Isaiah Stewart being a real NBA I felt maybe I was debating somebody who was debating something different, but I feel like I had a lot of conversations, a lot of people, comments, stuff like that. Like, he's not any good. It wasn't just the four-man thing. And so I expected this to be higher, but to YouTube users, maybe people did have high expectations. Yeah. Maybe I read the room wrong in general of the Pistons fan base, thinking they were lower on him than what they actually were. Ultimately, he's been really good. His rim protection is awesome. And he absolutely is getting, he probably doesn't play enough minutes to really get the all defense level conversation, but he's been incredible on that end of the floor. And to your point, I think he's gotten better with finishing around the rim, some of that stuff. And he loves setting off the ball screens for Malik Beasley, which I appreciate about him as well. Okay, next.
And Stu's going to have his moment in the playoffs, too. Yes. I'll just say that. Nationally, he's only known for the LeBron thing, which isn't fair to him. But in the playoffs, people are going to see him blocking shots and just the stuff he does. I do think he's going to have his moment in the playoffs. So
yeah, and to Michael's point, I've always liked Stewart, but he was an awful four. I don't disagree. I also don't think it was bad for Detroit to experiment to see if he could be a four. They were in experimentation mode when that time was going on. And that's why it frustrated me was it was fine for them to be trying that. So anyway, again, I played it up a little bit there. Try not to do that too much, but that was my chance. Okay, next at fourth, and there is a big gap again now. Stu was 105. Jalen Duren's at 84. His average is 4.2. His mode is fourth. It's funny how much the mode hit where they ended up. His range was 1 to 7. So pretty decent range here as well for the person that comes in fourth, Jalen Duren. For what it's worth, he was fourth on my list, Omari.
And Duren also was fourth on my list. So
he
we have some consistency there.
Sixth on Wes's list.
So Duren, he's another player that I think was divisive coming in, just because, I feel like it's a classic story with young athletic bigs who come in, they come in and they physically dominated their whole lives and they're young, and it takes a few years for the NBA game to slow down and for them to figure out how you can best impact it, right? And Duran, I think in the back half of the season especially, has begun to figure some things out. Like I think he's been second on the team in assists since Jaden Ivey went down. And like he probably has a pass or two a night where you're like, but overall, I think he's done far more good than bad as a playmaker this season for the first time, to where he is dishing more assists than he is turning the ball over. And like, he's making good plays. His shot blocking is up. He's still physically dominant as a rebounder. And he might be top 3 lob threats in the NBA at this point. Like that one-handed he had right over Washington's defense last night.
It was over Middleton.
Yeah, I mean, like that connection he has with Cade is pretty crazy. So like I would say for me personally, I figured with Duran, even through the frustrating moments, it was just like he has to turn 21 and get a little bit older. And, you get Stu and P. Reed around him, and now he's got more competition and, the big room, and like those things will probably push him. And that's what we're seeing. Like I think universally, most people would agree now that whatever you thought he was going to be coming then, for him to have started every single game and, it's not really doing some stuff we haven't seen, I think it's a huge credit to him.
Yeah, I mean, I think the top 4 for me was pretty easy to get to these 4. And then I'm fine with anybody's ranking. Like, I'm not judging that. Like, truly, it's fine. Like, because it's so subjective in terms of the expectation stuff. What was your personal expectation for a player? I mean, I could probably re-rank it and have Duran a little bit higher, especially based off how he's played recently. And I guess recently is like, it's like 2 months now. So it's not like it's just been a few weeks or something. But yeah, I think his growth defensively with his playmaking, somebody mentioned it in terms of the shot blocking. Yeah, Michael, I do think he's improved. I also think this would be interesting. I wish I had the time to like really study the film. I feel like he's been empowered a little bit more to go block shots. I feel like that's a JB and staff kind of thing, or at least it seems that way. And so I like that. And he's been good at it. And he has some recovery blocks. I hadn't seen him get beat in transition for quite a few games until I think Rashawn Holmes got him on Tuesday night finally, but it had been a lot of games since I had noticed one of those. The chemistry, yeah, as Kevin says, Cade and JD in pick and roll has been stellar. It's unreal. It's truly, if you haven't watched, listen, you don't need to subscribe. I'm telling you, go watch the video breakdown of some of the stuff I've done. When the ball leaves Cade's hands, Duran isn't even open. And the one last night, 0-2, Cade wasn't even looking at the rim. He was staring at Tim Hardaway Jr. on the weak side so he could move the tag guy, which Middleton was only there because he was guarding a SAR, and so he was helping in. But he just trusts Duran so much, he just literally throws it to the rim.
He puts so much pressure on the rim just being there. Like, it's insane. And to have like Cade, who's got to be, I mean, he's one of the best lob throwers in the league easily at this point. Like the one you just mentioned, like we kind of sit behind the rim. So like I'm looking at him live as he did it. And I just feel like I've been so much more impressed by some of the lobs he's thrown this season than I ever have been. That goes into it too. Like they've always had good chemistry, but now you're talking about like truly one of the best pick and roll duos in the NBA. And I think that's been a huge factor in K's success as well. Like K's not going to be a guy who gives you the most rim pressure, but pair him with a big who does. And, I think that closes that gap a bit.
Chuck says, great point, Chuck. He isn't worried that if he challenges, nobody will rotate anymore. That's a great call. Like he definitely is something there. Aruna, I'm taking my victory lap on saying we should build our offense around the KJD pick and roll. Take your victory laps. I'm all for it. Do your thing. All right, Wes, in fairness to Duran, I should say that I'm not grading him on his offensive output at all because I truly only care about his defense. He's starting to flash more on that end now, but it's recent and not consistent. So his defense has only somewhat exceeded my expectations, which is why I had him 6th. And they said, you're right, Bryce. He hunts them now, which is an upgrade. I'll take a quick picture of that where Wes says that I was right. I appreciate that. Yeah, Bryce, I've noticed a serious difference in defensive cohesiveness and aggressiveness since the new year. Do you think that's coaching? I think so. I think it's a mentality. I think it's a philosophy. And I think when you're a new coach, it sometimes takes a little while for you to get your players to buy in, completely understand, fully embrace it.
Isaiah Stewart deserves credit too, I'll say. Like I talked to Duran, like, you sit on the bench. Never before had you really sat on the bench and watched Stu at the 5 because you guys started next to each other. So about 20 minutes a night, he's sitting down and watching Stu
do his thing.
Maximize, like, every bit of his 7, like whatever Stu's wingspan is, like 7'4". And Duran's like, I watched that and you pick up some things. Like I think he's been able to see how Isaiah Stewart's shot blocking ignites the crowd and how it could really impact games. And I think that's helped him too. And also Paul Reed. Like Paul Reed does a lot of the same stuff. And I think just him being a young guy, having some bigs older than him who could set the example. Like, I think that's helped him a lot too. So it's coaching, but I think Isaiah Sturridge had a huge part of it too, just from leading the way with his own play.
And Devon brings up an interesting, I hope I'm saying your name correctly, brings up an interesting point here. JB said he needs to learn JD more at 1.2. That could be part of it as well, yeah. YouTube user. Like, maybe it was a thing where JB kind of wanted to play it this way and then realized, you know what? Like, Jalen Duren is going to be best used as a disruptor. And so I'm going to let him do that. And then everybody else has to adjust around that because, yes, listen, he, as YouTube user says, I wish Duren would pick up Stu's positioning and footwork. Not JD's strong point, especially in pick and roll. Watch him in ball screen defense. He gets his hips open the wrong direction a lot, but it is vastly improved. So there is a little bit of probably not a tier yet. The next player was only 10 points ahead of Jalen Duren. We will reveal number 3, number 2, number 1 right after this short break.
All right, we are back with segment 3, and we have about 15 minutes, so that gives us enough time to talk about these last 3. So number 3 on the list, and I feel like for a lot of people, the top 3 was pretty, I won't say universal, but you definitely see a little bit.
There's a lot of 1, 2s, and 3s in these 3 names, yeah.
Yeah, so number 3 is Ausar Thompson.
Yeah.
Ausar was number 2 on my list. Bryce, where did you have him?
I had him number 2 as well. Real quick, he had 74 total points, 3.7 average. His mode was 3. His range was 1 to 7. And Wes had Ausar 4th. So we were all kind of in lockstep here. I will say my expectations were a little bit lower. I mean, listen, I've been a little bit lower. Like, this is one where I may end up having to call like, hey, I was wrong. Defensively, I've already been wrong. And then along, I think your dad mentioned earlier, the blood clots had me nervous about what we were going to see from him in general anyway. And so that was part of why my expectations were a little bit lower and why I probably could exchange him and Jalen Duren depending. But man, he's been good. 0-2. He's been really good.
Yeah, he's been great. Yeah, same. Like, he comes in and you don't even know when he's going to come back, right? Like, anytime it's a blood clot situation, like you just don't know what you're getting into. Like, that's just one of those things where you kind of just have to wait and see. You know, and then of course he comes back and then there's still like sort of this filling out process on where to best use him. Bottom line for me is that before the season, I think we had rightful concerns about the spacing if they were to start Ausar and JD together. And Ausar didn't start until J.I. got hurt. So you kind of have to wait for that opportunity to open up. But pretty much since January 1st, right? Like, you know, J.I. got hurt January 1st, so the Ausar took over like whatever the next game was, like the 3rd or whatever. The Pistons have had one of the top defenses, and he slotted in pretty much perfectly as a guy who is leading the charge defensively. You know, he gives you another plus rebounder. Like, the Pistons dominate most teams on the glass because they have 4 plus rebounders in their starting lineup. You know, and the Ausar's been great there. The secondary playmaking, just everything, right? But he's also pretty much completely given up taking threes. And that's probably the most surprising aspect of that, is that he's been so effective everywhere else so fast after the blood clots that his lack of shooting almost is like a non-factor, right? I think last season we saw how much he could bog down the offense. And this season, he's been so productive elsewhere and have so much shooting elsewhere that it just hasn't really been too much of an issue. So Ausar's been phenomenal. They've been a much better team since he's been starting. And certainly he's surpassed a lot of expectations. I think this is close to the best case scenario for his season, given how last season ended for him.
So what I said earlier about how people crush Stu at the 4 and then we're fine with Ausar being a non-shooting 3-4, whatever you want to say, the major difference, because it's not even an apples to apples comparison, is that Ausar Thompson can pass the ball and dribble the ball, right? And that's what's making this work, is Ausar can grab and go. And this is a team that's playing at a very, very fast pace. And so that really works into his favor, that he can defensive rebound and then he can just get it and go. But I still think, like, yeah, well, maybe you build your offense around a Cade Jalen Duren pick and roll. I think one of the biggest things to unlock this offense is the Ausar Jalen Duren chemistry. I think it's a very underrated aspect of this thing working on the offensive end. I don't know that we ever see Ausar shoot it at a good enough level to where he gets guarded. I just don't. And I don't want to shortchange him. He's only his second year in the league, didn't have an offseason, like all of that. But if those two guys can figure out how to pass to each other, and the bigger thing is not cut into the same space. That's the worst thing they do right now, O2, is they cut into the same space at times, and then it really bogs down the lane. But what he's been able to do offensively is really impressive. And as Matt Way says, I've been really impressed with how he's taking advantage of the space people give to him, gives him a head start on drives, which mitigates some of the spacing issues. 100%. It's such an underrated aspect of taking advantage of defenses that don't guard you. Can you cut in behind them? Can you offensive rebound?
Which we also talked about, right?
He can absolutely do that. And then can you attack that space? So really, really impressive from Ausar.
He's been more confident in his handle too, because he had those opportunities last season and he just didn't necessarily take them. But I think this season he's understanding like I need to attack because I'm faster and I actually have the ball handling to do it. So we're seeing some more of that.
So Harry says, I admit I had a SAR 7. I felt it since OT and Summer League. Like, that's the difference. Like, Harry felt it coming in to the draft. He felt it from Summer League. And so, like, this is where the difference in the rankings really, really come into play, is just where you felt like a player was going to be at. I want to talk about his defense real quick, because I feel like, again, we're going to shortchange it because I say real quick. What have you thought about his defense? I feel like we always end up, like, migrating to his offense, and we're just like, hey, his defense is really good, but let's talk about the offensive stuff. What have you loved about his defense, Omari? Where do you think he's really flourished?
The best aspect of his defense is that he just has a tendency to be everywhere. Like, you know, he's always the first one back in transition, and like he's already back in transition before like the transition even started. Like, you just kind of blink and he's there. Like, his versatility, right? Like, you know, guys much bigger than him and, you know, smaller than him, like he can hang with, and he's just got a natural sense of timing. If there's been one area where I think he's a great team defender. I think he can be a really great one-on-one defender, especially against certain types of stars. But we've also seen him pick up fouls a lot, especially in the last couple weeks. And I think he's still figuring out some of the on-ball stuff and like how much leeway he gets with certain aspects of it. But like on his best nights, again, just because of how well he moves, how well he times everything, and just his general awareness, like you'll see him getting back on defense, like scanning the whole floor, seeing where everybody is, and just stuff like that. Like, I just think he is the type of defender that just lifts your entire floor. Like, he's like second in steals for like the past 2 months or something behind Dyson Daniels. And that's like, Dyson Daniels is like the Steph Curry of like still on the ball right now. Like, it's kind of underrated what he's been doing as far as steals this season. Not like
still couldn't guard Cade Cunningham. Still couldn't guard Cade Cunningham, by the way.
He cannot guard Cade. He cannot guard Cade. But beyond that, yeah, Asar's a defense onto himself, and he just has to figure out, I think, some of the one-on-one stuff.
So Diaz says, aloha from Holland, Michigan. Ron Holland II is the man. Let's go Pistons. Wes, interesting question. If Ivy never, by the way, defensively, I agree with you. I think at point of attack, he still has some room for growth. I think his screen navigation has actually improved throughout the season. The disruption is unbelievable. On ball, deflections, off ball, blocks. And then the way the Pistons are playing right now, where they turn that stuff into transition offense, fits perfectly with what he does. So whether this is what JB envisioned or JB, I think I would give him more credit if he's like, oh, this is what my team is. Now I need to morph it into this play style. It's working. Wes, I asked Omari this before we started. If Ivy never gets hurt, does Ausar ever make it into the starting lineup this year? It's an interesting question. I think you can make the argument that if J.I. continued to shoot, some people forget, at 40% from three, maybe you could take Tim Hardaway Jr. out and put Ausar in. Now you have Tim Hardaway Jr. and Beasley both coming off the bench, kind of defensive liabilities. I would say no, but I don't know. It's really, really interesting. Let me ask you this real quick, Omari. It's been asked a couple times. Any updates on J.I.? Injury-wise, stuff like that?
No, we should be able to actually talk to him, hopefully sometime within the next week, simply because injured players, like, they're required to talk at least once after. And there's just been so much going on with the Pistons as it happened. But we were actually going to do it, I think, today, and end up canceling practice. That's another thing, too, is that they've canceled a lot of practices. But we'll talk to him at some point. They're going to have an injury update for him at some point. I would guess within the next week. My sense is that they're still not going to rush him back. Like, I wouldn't bet on him being back before the playoffs still, just because of the nature of his injury. But hopefully by the next time we record, we'll have a more substantial update there.
Chuck says, not sure this is the right time to ask. Chances that Ausar plays Summer League this year? I would say 0 based off what we've seen right now.
Yeah, I don't think any of these, I would be shocked if any of these guys play Summer League except maybe Ron. I just don't see the upside at this point.
Okay, last two players, everybody probably knows what two it is. In second with 55, so a little bit of a gap here. You go a 19-point difference, 2.8 average. His mode was 2, a range of 1 to 6. He was number 3 on mine. Omari's, where was he at on yours? As on Wes's, he was number 2. Comes in Cade Cunningham.
Yeah, so I'm going to sound like the hater here, but my argument is the same as your argument for Stu. So I had Cade 6th.
Love it.
And I understand why he's so high, because he's an all-star, like probably going to be all-NBA at this point. No. He's earned it.
No. He's going to be all-NBA. 02.
Yeah, I say probably just because sometimes the voting gets a little wacky, but I think he'll get it.
If Cade Cunningham plays 65 games and he is not all NBA, we boycott the voters. I will lead the charge. I will lead. I don't even care about postseason awards. That man is second team all NBA as things stand right now.
And he should be. But he's been great. I think everything you wanted Cade to become this season, he's been, for some people, maybe more, because I think kind of like Stu, like when you're a number 1 pick, until you actually start to winning, people are always going to question, like, if you deserve to be that. And there are certainly, I don't know how big the contingent was, but certainly some people who didn't think Cade could do it, and he's been doing a lot of it. So I understand why he's higher. For me personally, everything Cade is doing this season is stuff that we've seen him do, just not with the same level of consistency. But we've seen him take over games, like, we've seen how good he is at passing the ball. We like last season after the first 25 games or whatever, he really cut down on his turnovers, so we knew that. He's shown, like, I don't know if he's shown anything new per se. He's just like outside of the step back threes and and some of the threes he's getting off the screens. He added that. He's always done this. He's always had nights where it's like, okay, I see why he's the number 1 pick, because he has nights where he just completely goes off. There's nothing like defenses could do to solve it, right? Like he's picking you apart with his own scoring, with his passing, like everything. But he's doing it almost every single night now. And that's the difference with any star, right? Like anybody can have a good game sometimes, but it's having a good game every single night. And that's been, second year back from injury, like that's been a key for him. So I'm not really surprised by any of it, but I understand it from the standpoint of he was hurt, number 1 pick, hadn't really done this before, and now he's actually doing it.
YouTube user says Bryce has guaranteed it on multiple podcasts, and I will continue to guarantee that Cade Cunningham is going to be all NBA, and I will stick to, I think right now he is definitely second team all NBA, and that is why I had him as high as I did. Listen, I've always been a Cade supporter. I've spent a lot of evenings debating people on how good Cade Cunningham was or was not. I think
the same. We both always thought he was we never really questioned whether or not he had star talent.
I'm ready for the comment or somebody, because people come out, well, Bryce, you said he wasn't the number 1 option. People misconstrue what I said. I've said from day one, Cade Cunningham was the face of the franchise and the best player on the Detroit Pistons when they compete for a championship. Now, where I may have to walk back a statement was, I thought he may not be the leading scorer. I thought Cade may be this triple-double machine who maybe averaged 22, 23 a game, and then you had somebody else, 25 a game. Now, what he's showing is he can take the whole load, right? He can average the 25, 26 a game and do all of the other stuff. And so that's where I may end up being wrong. We'll see. But please don't come at me saying that I never thought Cade was face of the franchise number 1 potential, because that never came out of my mouth. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say.
All right. Listen, I want to read off the numbers real quick, because I do think there's been some improvement here. 22.7 to 25.7, 45 from the field to 46. Interesting, the three-point shooting isn't as much of a jump as what you would think just when you watch him play in terms of volume or percentage.
And he's been a slump for a few weeks, too.
Yeah, sure. Free throw percentage now is about the same after a really uncharacteristic slow start percentage-wise, but the attempts are up. I think where he's made a ton of ground, 0-2. Rebounds are almost 2 more per game. Assists are almost 2 more per game. Minutes are almost 2 more per game. And he's already played 61 games. I think it's the minutes, it's the load, and you said it. The consistency. It's not easy to do what Cade Cunningham has done on a night in, night out basis. It's ridiculous. And I had high expectations for him. The fact he's exceeded my expectations is why I had him as high as I did, is that I did not think all NBA. I did not think lead his team to a top 6 seed in the East. when you can't name me their second best player, and when you can't name me somebody's second best player and they're 7 or 8 games over 500, that's a dude in this league. And so no matter how you want to cut it, Omari, that man's been incredible this season.
Yeah, K has been phenomenal. We both agree, most should agree, all NBA. And realistically, yeah, like I would say him and Asar are like, and our number one, of course, are probably the 3 guys who are just universally like, yeah, like they've killed it this season.
All right, let's get to it. 20 points ahead of Cade Cunningham, an average of 1.8, a mode of 1, I'll count those up as you talk, and a range of 1 to 5. I think everybody knows at this point, Malik Beasley, who is having a elite season shooting the basketball. Omari, your thoughts on Malik Beasley?
Yeah, he's one of 3 players in NBA history to average at least 9 threes a game with a 41% clip. The first player is Steph, who did it 6 times. The second player is Clay, who did it once. So, very unique group.
Do those guys shoot the ball well? Are those good shooters?
I think so.
Okay, I thought so too.
I'm a recent NBA fan. I started watching like 2 years ago. So like honestly couldn't tell you. So who are these people who thought Malik Beasley was going to have one of the best shooting seasons of all time? Like who are the people who had him like outside of the top 3? Because we all knew that he could shoot, but this is by far his career year.
Okay, so this is my argument for Malik Beasley, number 1, because I had people tell me, like, I knew Malik Beasley was a good shooter. With all due respect, this isn't good shooting. This isn't great shooting. This is elite three-point shooting, Omari. Elite. And I did not think the Pistons were getting elite 6th man of the year, 2nd leading scorer on the team, shooting and offense from Malik Beasley. So here are the numbers, and I'll even do per 100 possessions, so it takes into account pace and everything else. 42% from 3, that's his best mark of his career outside of a year where he played 14 games. 16 and a half attempts per 100, not per game, per 100 possession, the most of his career. Almost 7 makes per 100 possessions, the most of his career. The 29 points per 100 possessions, the most of his career outside of the season where he played 14 games. This is elite level 3-point shooting that is unreal. And again, this guy is 2nd on the team in scoring if you take out Jaden Ivey. And and now he's even starting to make some 2s. And the other thing I will say
he's starting to catch some lobs.
Yes, there's starting to be a little bit of stuff from 2 where he breaks down, shot fake, gets into a float or stuff like that. So Matt Way says it perfect. Historic shooting plus elite teammate, the latter of which I did not expect. I didn't know Malik Beasley was going to be the leader of the vibes. I didn't know that I was going to sit at a press conference in Denver and JB ask about Malik Beasley, wouldn't talk about the shooting. He would say he's a great teammate and brings great positive energy. To me, this was a no-brainer. I respect anybody who thinks differently. This is well beyond anything I expected from Malik Beasley with the Pistons.
Yeah, he was trademark veteran shooter on a 1-year deal when he came in. And he's been the leader of the vibes. He's been the leader of the spacing. And everybody university is like, we have to keep him. And he went to trade Lady and said, please don't trade me because I want to be here. There is no way this could have possibly worked out better for anybody involved. This is the best case scenario for Bees, best case scenario for the Pistons, best case scenario for the fans. He's been the leader of the locker room, the leader of the fandom. I feel like every metric he's just passed with flying colors. So he was number 1 on my list. And honestly, I don't even think I consider anybody else. He by far has surpassed my expectations the most this season. I don't think anybody would have guessed any of this. And if you did, hey, shout out to you because this has been amazing.
Yeah. Alan says, I tuned in late. Was Ivy included and where did he rank? Jaden Ivey was not included. So I will go back through the rankings at the end, but we didn't include Jaden Ivey, Marcus Sasser, anybody traded at the deadline, anything like that. Beasley's been awesome. I need some context here. Your dad says Malik Beasley, number 1. I saw this coming 27 years ago and named the son after him, Nostra Dad-ish.
Yeah. I have a younger brother. His name is Malik. And he's 27 years old. Actually, a recent basketball fan. So here's another credit to Steph. So me and my dad were the the hardcore basketball heads growing up. And my mom too. My mom liked basketball. But my brother and sister not really that much into it. Steph Curry is so incredible. He got my brother to watch basketball. He had no interest up until he probably just caught some Steph Curry highlights one day. And it was this is amazing. Single-handedly won him over. And now he watches the Pistons too. So that's what my dad was talking about. Nostradadish. Malik's a way more common name now than it was when my parents named Malik. So he's just taking some credit there.
Sham says, what will it take to bring him back? Hopefully the non-taxpayer MLE is what it takes to bring him back. If not,
that's all
then
they can do.
the offseason is going to get real interesting, my friend.
Yeah.
All right, a few just to close this out. Well, let me run it down and then we'll go to these. So first, Malik Beasley. Second, Cade Cunningham. Third, Asar Thompson. Fourth, Jalen Duren. Fifth, Isaiah Stewart. Sixth, Ron Holland. Seventh, Tobias Harris. Eighth, Tim Hardaway Jr. Ninth, Simone Fontecchio. Just remember that was a cumulative of 20 different people that submitted quote unquote ballots or whatever. Very subjective. Everybody has their own idea of expectations and where those started. So numbers were a little bit all over the place. Okay. Kevin asked, are the canceled practices a normal thing? What is your experience after being 10 years on the beat, 9 years on the beat, something like that?
Yeah. 5 years on the Pistons, 7 for the league. A lot of teams don't like a lot of teams.
Oh, you only had practice. 2 with the Grizzlies before the move?
I only had a couple with the Grizzlies.
My bad.
Yeah, but man, if I was a decade in, that means I would have been a beat writer since I was 20. Like that's like sophomore year of
Sorry,
college.
my bad. I tried to get you up to my age. That's my fault.
Okay. That's okay. It's okay. I'm not there yet, but it's okay. Like a lot of teams don't practice. Like the Bucks are. Well, when Budenholzer were there, like Notorious dude, like did not practice, and like a lot of teams just don't really practice that much anymore. So the Pistons still do, but not as much as they did previously, and like that's because they have more vets, and they've proven they can win, and teams are a lot more cognizant of downtime and rest and stuff like that. So yeah, I'll say it's actually probably a bit more of the norm now for them to practice less. Like they definitely can go a week without practicing, and that's pretty much how it's been all year. And it's worked for them.
Derek Brown, O2 is an elite nickname. I agree. Order of the Blazing Horse, this is our guy Harry. If JB Bickerstaff was included on the list, where would he be? Top 3 or 4? I thought JB was a fine hire. It's been a home run hire, as I think JB should finish second in Coach of the Year rankings right now.
He was number 1.
I mean, the Cavs are just silly.
Okay.
Like, listen, I understand, but like multiple 12-game winning streaks.
They've won 19 of 20.
They're unreal. I understand. Like, I'll hear the argument. I think Kenny probably wins it unless there's a complete, like, just something crazy down the stretch. I solidly have JB number 2. Did not plan on saying that. The defense has been way better than I thought it was going to be. Even some of the offensive stuff has been better than I thought it was going to be. So he would be fairly high in these rankings for me.
I'll probably have him 5th, honestly, right in between Duren and Ron Holland. So for those who don't know, JB Bickerstaff was the head coach of the Grizzlies when I started covering them at the beginning of the 2018-19 season. Well, technically it was like 7 games into the 2018-19 season, but yeah, like he was the head coach. Got fired at the end of that season. They hired Taylor Jenkins. They drafted Ja, and the current era started. So I was kind of there for the transition for those 2 years until the pandemic hit, which is when I moved back home. But I already knew JB. Like I knew how he operated. I knew how he coached. And I knew coming in that he was going to be an instant impact because of his energy. I just knew it. Like I just knew he was going to come in and immediately click. I knew Pistons fans would like him. I'm like, this is going to be a good hire. He exceeded my expectations a little bit, because I didn't see him winning however many games they're going to win. And you can never really predict this, right? But JB has always kind of been this type of coach. And, I think it said a lot that he took over in Memphis. He was the interim. I think he took over for Lloyd Pierce. I'm pretty sure he took over for Lloyd Pierce like halfway through. He took over for John Beilein in Cleveland. So this was like the first time that he was brought in as I think he took over for Kevin McHale in Houston. So on paper, I'm like, this is the perfect situation. He's a perfect coach. It'll work out. But again, you can't really predict the extent that it's clicked. So
yeah, and my thing is Wes and I talked about this during the hiring process. I just don't know about head coaches enough to really say. I'll know more the next time because I watch more NBA in general now. But yeah, man, he's been Yeah, this is funny, Chuck. You'd be called a slappy and run out of the chat if you'd said 45-ish wins. Chuck, you were absolutely right. I probably would have spearheaded that. I wouldn't have ran you out of the chat because we love all of our listeners and we want you guys to stay, but I would have respectfully disagreed and then I would look like a slappy. I mean, I do. I thought less than 30 wins was probably the ceiling, right at 30 wins. So Omari sums it up the best. The OG Omari, one of your top shows all time on my list. Great job, Pistons Pulse team.
Appreciate you, Pops.
Thank you. Yes, always appreciate your support. This was a fun one. We'll get back to talking on the court basketball after a few games this week. We'll be back next week. Again, please subscribe, rate, review, like, share. Help us spread the word as this Piston things grows, because Lord knows people need to listen to us, not necessarily the national media, about the Pistons, because I don't want to be arrogant, but I think we do a better job.
We could be a little bit arrogant. That's like one of my weird beat writer pet peeves, is that people care so much about the national attention when I've been here every single day for 5 years and I I feel like we are like the best Pistons podcast. Like, people can disagree, but we've been doing it, and I'm happy with our product. So if you're frustrated with Shaq and Stephen A and all these other people, like, just tap into the Pistons Post because we got you.
That's right. And here's the thing. What I love is that I went through the 4 years at least. I know Pistons fans have been through a lot more than me, but we both have went through this whole process. And I tell people all the time, I feel pretty confident. I know Cade Cunningham's game better than anybody else because I've watched every second of that man's Detroit Pistons career. Yeah, talk that ish, Omari. So
yeah, I have no sympathy at all when fans are frustrated. It's like, we're topping the better content. Like, what do you want me to do? You know, like, we're working hard to do this for you.
You got the Pistons Pulse, you got the Detroit Free Press, you got the Motor City Hoops Substack. Not to mention, you have the Pin Down on Detroit Bad Boys. You got Locked On Pistons. You got, like, I'm leaving people out, and I apologize. We got my guy Harry Mraz with the Order of the Blazing Horse. Guys, there is great Pistons content. I would never go to the national media to listen to people talk about the Pistons. And I do national stuff now, and I will still tell you, like, the
it's no offense to them. Hey,
no, it's hard.
Do amazing work.
Omari, it is hard
to cover
the whole team.
It's no fault to them. 30 teams is a lot. You can't follow all of them.
No, I know a lot about the Cleveland Cavaliers. I can't tell you the vibes because, Pistons Jack absolutely does an incredible job. Like, I can't tell you the intricacies of the Cavs the way I can tell you about the Pistons. And I've watched double-digit full games with notes on the Cavs, just like I do Detroit. It's not the same as watching every single one with the fine-tooth comb the way I do, the way you do, the way Wes does, the way Koo does, the way everybody else does. Come to us for your content, all of us. So
that's right. Local media matters, man. We're still here. We're still doing it.
Let's do it. All right. Take it away, my guy.
All right. Big thanks to all of you for tuning in. And as always, big thanks to our audio producer, Robin Chan, our editor-in-chief, Nicole Avery Nichols, our executive producer, Bill Bradley, and big thanks to Wes Davenport, as always. And we'll talk to you all next week.